Well, in one article that you recently wrote for the Washington Post, you wrote that, Obama chose General McChrystal for being like Petraeus, but now that's backfiring on Obama.
I think he chose him because he wanted somebody who could get the military to think about the mission in the broadest possible sense. Hey, this isn't about killing bad guys. It's about politics and government and reconstruction. So he wanted a McChrystal to sort of redefine what the military does. But he doesn't want another Petraeus, which is sort of what I wrote, another guy who's going to be the dominant face of the war. Petraeus sort of senses that, and that's why he stepped back into the shadows, I think. I mean, he's got a very acute political sense, and he realizes that Obama doesn't want that. McChrystal, interestingly, gets himself in trouble several weeks back in a speech in London in which he talks about the war and sort of his belief for the need for a sort of comprehensive counterinsurgency strategy that upsets some people in the White House. And if you look at McChrystal, his career path is very different than Petraeus's. I mean, all these generals are a product of their experiences. He spends most of his time in the black special operations world, doesn't spend a lot of time at the elbow of generals, doesn't spend a lot of time in Washington, and he doesn't have that sort of acute political sense, I think, that General Petraeus does.
Can you sum up for us the options that General Stanley McChrystal is presenting to President Obama?
Yeah, I mean, he's offered up 3, although these could change. I mean, I think if the Obama administration changes the mission, then General McChrystal will have to go back and change what he needs to achieve the mission. Right now, for the mission that he's been given, his preference is about 44,000 more troops on top of the 68,000 the U.S. has there now. And I think that will allow him to do what he thinks of as a comprehensive counterinsurgency strategy. That means get into the populated areas, protect the people, try and rebuild the sort of Afghan government. Rebuild is probably the wrong term. It's build an Afghan government out there, build an Afghan economy. So that's the middle option that seems to be, I think, the military's preferred option. The other option is about 10 to 15,000 more troops. That's going to mean that the Taliban will continue to have safe havens throughout the country that the U.S. military won't be able to take back. There are going to be areas where they're not going to be able to extend the reach of the Afghan government, where they're not going to improve the economy. That's the low-end option. The high option is 80,000, which would be a comprehensive counterinsurgency strategy across the entire country. I don't think anyone thinks that that's within the realm of possibility.
So with the 10 to 15,000 more troops, what would the plan be? What would the strategy be?
And I think the strategy is to hold as much as you can, to focus on building Afghan security forces to take over what you're holding, and slowly transition those areas to them. But I think it would markedly constrain your ambitions in the country. Hey, we're not going to build a coherent Afghan state, and maybe that shouldn't be our goal. Our goal should be preventing al-Qaeda from having a safe haven there. But, there are going to be parts of this country that are controlled by the Taliban, and maybe that's okay for the near term.
The Pentagon's top military officer oversaw a secret war game earlier this month to evaluate the 2 primary military options that McChrystal has put to Obama. So do you know how these war game scenarios worked out, and what if any lessons they offered?
Right. I mean, it's a tricky one because, these aren't big, you're predicting human behavior here. So there aren't big computer simulated models. And really, this was more sort of a debate. One of the things that they did realize is that, I think, or assumed going in, that if you have 44,000 troops, you can take areas back from the Taliban that you can't take if you've got 10 to 15, which seems pretty obvious. The other thing I think they were looking at is, how would the Taliban in Pakistan react to the various options? The interesting thing to me is, at this moment, the military's sort of staunch belief that it can build a coherent Afghan state, that it can conduct probably one of the most ambitious nation-building exercises in history. I think I wrote in one column a few months back that Afghanistan can sometimes make Iraq look like Switzerland. Parts of Afghanistan look like the 4th century. So it still amazes me, and it's really a legacy of sort of Petraeus' energy and intellectual dominance that the military is saying, hey, I think we can rebuild this place. I'm not saying they can't. I am saying it is a nation-building exercise that's far more ambitious than anything we've ever attempted as a country.
And one of the reasons why it's a bit of a leap of faith to think that we can build a coherent government, a coherent democracy in Afghanistan, is that, as you pointed out earlier, that kind of government has never existed in that country. So it's not a question of rebuilding, it's a question of creating something that never existed.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I mean, on the plus side, I sound like a total skeptic. I mean, if you look at the Army today, and this is, I think, part of what we try and capture in the book, I mean, the Army has really changed. Young officers, largely at Petraeus' urging and insistence and prodding, and in some ways just through their own hard-won experience in Iraq and Afghanistan, I mean, they really do throw themselves into these missions in a way they haven't in the past. I mean, Petraeus really has changed the culture of the military. I mean, it's interesting. I was just thinking how he does it, particularly when he was in Iraq. I remember there's one electrical transmission tower that got knocked down by insurgents about a year and a half before he got there. It was called Tower 57. And it wasn't that important a tower. In fact, the Iraqis and the U.S. military had figured out how to route power around that down tower into Baghdad. So it wasn't having an effect being down. But Petraeus was insistent that Tower 57 be fixed. And every morning at his morning briefing, he would hound folks, hey, what are we doing to fix Tower 57? And to ultimately fix it, it required the U.S. military, the Iraqi army, the Ministry of Electricity, the Iraqi Ministry of Defense, all kind of working together to put a plan to fix this tower and hold the terrain so the tower didn't get knocked down again. And by raising it every morning in his morning brief, he forces the Army to figure out, well, how do we fix downed electrical towers and all the different components that go into it? And everybody else who's watching the briefing, because all the other commanders watch it, think, gosh, I hope I don't have any Tower 57s in my area because he's going to be crawling all over me if I have a downed electrical transmission tower. So they start to fix their towers. And it just changes the mindset where they really do start to think about, well, how do we rebuild these broken places? And I think it's given them a lot of the confidence that, hey, we can do this in Afghanistan, even though it's significantly harder.